So hello everyone. Sheffield and Wedderburn are delighted to be sponsoring this year's RenewableUK Onshore Wind Energy Conference. And as part of that sponsorship, we're bringing you this extra session, which looks at the current state of aviation mitigation and the solutions that are now being sought, both by the aviation industry and the renewable energy sector. I'm joined by a panel of 4 members of the Scottish Government's Aviation 2030 Task Force. So we have Lesley McNeil of the Scottish Government, Ross Nimmo of Glasgow Airport, Andrew Liddell of Banks Renewables, and aviation consultant Andy Knill. Before we kick off our discussion and I let everyone introduce themselves properly, I'll briefly set the scene. So as a partner in Sheffield and Wedderburn's energy team, part of my role involves assisting wind farm developers in their various dealings with both civil and defence aviation stakeholders. And what we're doing there is seeking mitigation solutions for proposed wind projects. At the recently held RenewableUK Aviation Conference, the Scottish Minister Paul Wheelhouse made what I felt were some very powerful statements about this area. So in that speech, he recognised the increased urgency of climate change issues, the major challenges facing the aviation industry due to COVID-19, and the key role that both those sectors play in the economy and in the move towards net zero. And in that speech, the Minister set a path towards a world where aviation mitigation is effectively removed as a barrier to wind energy deployment. And effectively, the aviation world accepts wind farms as part of our base case, if you like, by 2030. And I was really struck by the importance of this for wind farm deployment. All too often as a lawyer, I see these two great sectors at odds with each other. So I'm very keen to explore the how of delivering this vision. So how do we get systemic change quickly and effectively? And let's face it, in an ideal world, you really want me to be out of a job. So this short session looks at how the Scottish Government and both those industries wish to steer their way along this path. So I'm delighted, therefore, to ask our panel to contribute to this discussion. So can I first ask you to introduce yourselves? Lesley, can I come to you first?
Hi everyone, my name is Lesley McNeil. I'm the Head of Wind Energy Policy at the Scottish Government, which means I've got policy responsibility for the teams that lead on both onshore wind and those that lead on offshore wind.
Thanks, Lesley. Ross?
Sure, thanks, Liz. Hi everyone, I'm Ross Nimmo, Head of Planning and Development for Glasgow Airport. So my main responsibilities include planning for the future of the airport through our master plan and development strategies. But my role also includes aerodrome safeguarding, which my team undertake for Glasgow and Aberdeen airports. So we have a lot of day-to-day interaction with the industry. And I also have a bit of a background, although it's sort of 11, 12 years ago now. I used to do some planning consultancy work for wind farm developers as well. So got a perspective from both angles, if you like.
Thanks, Ross. Andrew Liddell?
Yes, hi everyone, I'm Andrew Liddell. I'm the Development Director for Banks Renewables Limited. I have the good fortune to have spent the last 10 years of my life working in renewable energy, and pretty much for that entire 10 years working on resolving or helping to resolve a bunch of aviation issues on a number of wind farms, including 2 very big Scottish wind farms of ours. Really enjoyed the collaborative working that's come out of that. We've delivered solutions, we've entered many mitigation contracts. I think there's lots of really good and not so good practice out there, but I think we're in a fantastic place to press on with the 2030 vision, which we'll come on to talk about. So that's really me.
Thanks, Andy. And Andy Key.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Knill. I'm currently the aviation advisor for RenewableUK, where I've helped provide them with the technical input. I've an aviation history after 20 years in the Royal Air Force, and also 20 years as Head of Surveillance and Spectrum Management at the Civil Aviation Authority. I'm also supporting Lesley on the Aviation 2030 Task Force, and looking very much at how we overcome the obstacles to the future. It's not just the technicalities, it's getting the overall concept that we can all work together and get to a level of coexistence. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. So maybe just to kick things off, Lesley, could you maybe give an update on the show so far with the task force? Where's it got to?
Absolutely. I'm really pleased to be here to be able to sort of talk about this work stream. It's one that we're really pleased about, and it's one we found we've had a great deal of engagement on. I mean, I would say that the real heart of this work is the collaboration point. We've not created this. We can't take any credit for it. There's been collaboration between the aviation sector and the renewable sector for years. There's so many gigawatts that have been released. There's so many joint projects that have gone ahead. But what we're trying to do with the Aviation 2030 work is to harness that and to look at this problem from a more holistic perspective. We need to start seeing this through the lens of net zero, and that we all have a personal responsibility to the delivery of net zero. And what can we do working together to consider this to be a single problem that we all have a part to play in the solution of? So we actually kicked this work off just about a year ago, actually slightly over a year. We've just missed AV 2030's first birthday. We had that initial meeting, which was really good. We managed to sort of establish a set of key principles that I think that all members could address and be a part of. We then had a follow-up meeting in February where we managed to set out the detail on 2 specific work streams, which we're really keen to sort of progress and push ahead with. And then COVID happened. And I think that it's fair to say that the work has somewhat stalled over the period of this summer and early autumn, because the world just went up and changed on us. So we are now at the point that we can start thinking about kicking this work back into a gear again. We need to look at this again through that net zero perspective, but also through green recovery. We need to sort of imbue everything that we do with that green recovery from COVID narrative. And I really think that this work stream and this work has really great potential to do so. What can we do to really support both these sectors to create strong green jobs, just like First Minister went into detail on when she talked about programme for government. So really that's where we are now. What can we do to restart this work? And we're hoping to start doing that again from our next interim meeting, which is going to happen in mid-November.
Thanks, Lesley. So that's actually really useful to hear, because part of the worry, I think, sometimes when you're in this space is you're missing something and you don't know everything that's going on and what the discussions might be. So really just understanding that things are likely to build some momentum going forwards now that we've kind of all got used to the new normal, if that's a fair comment. And then just looking more at the substance of the issues then, because it is a challenging area. I don't know who wants to kick off. Maybe if I come to Mr. Liddell first, are there any particular things that you think I see as the key building blocks, the things that will be the success factors, if you like, in delivering that vision? Is it all about policy? Do we need to spend more money? You know, where are the solutions going to come?
So I think sticking with the building blocks sort of analogy, the thing we have is a very firm foundation, I think, without too many puns being thrown in. I think when you look at the last 10 years of the work that the aviation stakeholders have done, collaborating, using that word again, because that's the watchword I think going forward, with the renewable energy sector, with the Scottish Government involved at many stages to just try and help smooth some of those conversations and really try and marry up policy, etc. I think has been really quite successful, and some people would disagree with me, but when you look across, for example, the Scottish Central Belt, you're looking at all major airports with mitigation solutions deployed. That's not where we were 10 years ago. It was a theory 10 years ago that they even existed, whereas now they exist, they've been implemented and they've been managed, and there are contractual mechanisms. So I think building on that particular building block, I think it's a time of reflection in these discussions to look at that deployment and how it can be best utilised, along with other work that Nats en route, for example, have been doing in terms of bringing in new solutions. And it's about trying to make sure we can get the absolute best of the foundation that's already been laid. There are discussions about planning policy and how things would change over time, but I think we need to focus on where we're trying to get to by 2030, which in a nutshell has been sort of worded around about aviation stakeholders taking on self-management of these issues so that renewable energy can move on. I think it's really important to state that, but that's a massive transition between 2020 and 2030 to get there. Nobody's under any illusions that that's an easy journey, with or without COVID, to be fair. But we've got that foundation. We have got a willingness at Scottish Government level. I think it's been fantastic. We've got a real willingness with aviation stakeholders to attend those meetings and come along and actually speak very openly about their challenges, because we cannot be myopic as a renewable industry. And I think now we're all listening to each other, and there's an ambition to get to that 2030 position. There's a chance, and it's now all about making sure those meetings are effective, and we get the views of people who are listening to this to help shape that as well.
Okay, thanks, Andy. That's really helpful. And maybe come to Ross. Ross, do you want to sort of comment from the aviation perspective?
Yeah, sure. I'd probably build on the collaboration point that's been made. I think Lesley referred to it in terms of, when we first approached this, when I was looking at it as a wind farm developer 12 years ago, it was a real kind of black box. You would submit your application, you would get an objection from the then BAA, and it would be pretty difficult to have a conversation with them to try and understand what the issue was, and far less to find a mitigation or a solution to it. I think we have moved a lot since that time. I think between the renewables business and airports and the NSPs, we've had to take the initiative. And I would say at Glasgow, we've been fairly lucky to have some good partnerships with the industry and the government to be able to put a mitigation system in place. But part of that has been an informed collaboration. You don't want to hear me bleating about how difficult it is for the aviation industry, but it's a pretty complex business to be involved in. And we're dealing with regulatory, business, operational pressures coming from a myriad of different sources. And this is but one of those issues that we need to try and tackle. So I think it's important for both sides to recognise and have some appreciation of the operating environment. And that goes for the aviation side, looking into the renewables sector as well, and in particular as things, for example, like the subsidies regime have evolved over time, and there's been a downward pressure in cost, and that's certainly a conversation that we have had on a number of occasions with the industry, that we need to be alive to that too. Learning from what has worked is really important for me. I think, reflecting again that we don't have a blank slate here. This is not about inventing a new widget that's going to serve to solve the world's ills. We actually need to take both the technology, but also I think that some of the commercial and operational procedures that have been put in place at different airports, and try and work with those. Because I think they were put in place with the best of intentions. I'd like to say the one at Glasgow works relatively well, but I would say that, I suppose. So I think taking what has already been achieved and trying to learn from that and build from it in perhaps areas where things aren't working as well as we would all like them to be. And then just dealing in that reality, and understanding that the individuals that you're dealing with have the same pressures and objectives and frameworks that you have as well. That we can't just wish some of these issues away. People are not doing them just to be awkward. That they exist for good reason. And I think the more that we can kind of respect each other's positions, understand each other's positions, and move forward in a kind of informed collaboration, I think that's where, and that's certainly, what I've heard around the table from the task force, that's the kind of direction that we're looking to take.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ross. That's really helpful. And can I maybe come over to Andy Knill? And I understand that the task force has a couple of different work streams, one of which is more focused on policy and the other on technology and innovation. And I don't know if you have any thoughts if there are policy changes or other changes that could help people move forwards from some of those positions that they've had to adopt, as Ross has rightly said, up until now.
Thank you very much, Liz. And following on very much from what Ross has said, I think the level of cooperation we have now is significantly different to that from when I was first involved in this during my time at CAA almost 20 years ago. Everybody is working together. We are trying very hard to overcome the issues. But I think, and through the Aviation 2030 Task Force work streams, we've recognised that one of the key stumbling blocks is the regulatory policy and strategy framework within which we all have to work. And I think that's particularly true on the aviation side. We've seen really good cooperation with CAA, with HIAL, with individual airports, with NATS, etc. But they are constrained by the framework in which they have to operate, from both a policy side, from the directions that are issued to the CAA for their priorities, of course, and the flexibility that the air navigation service providers and the airports can actually use to help move forward potential mitigations. And so one of the things we need to look at within the task force is identifying where are those constraints. And it's not about changing standards or changing complete attitudes around things. It's about creating a framework as a catalyst for all the stakeholders to be able to work with a renewed vision, if you like, and not constrained by many historic practices and approaches. And an example for this is it's not just about technologies, but we have changes within the airspace architectures, etc. We have changes within how surveillance is conducted. And a lot of these are reflected in evolving policies from CAA. But above CAA, we have the Department for Transport, who set the directions for CAA and set the framework for the air navigation service providers in many ways. Now, with aviation not being devolved to the Scottish Government, Transport Scotland is working very hard with us to look at these areas. But of course, the key player for the future is the Department for Transport. And this is where we need this joined up cross-government approach from the Whitehall end that ensures the right framework is given for CAA, NATS, HIAL, the service providers, the airports, etc., to work together with Wind to bring together all these potential benefits from airspace changes, changes in technology, modernization approaches, which are already being driven by development within aviation. Now, we know aviation's taken a really hard hit because of COVID-19, and we know that their priority in many respects at this time is that recovery process. However, during the recovery process, there often come many opportunities. And I think what we've got to look at is something coming down from on high, from a DFT engagement in all of this process, to help draw together all the threads so that we can work together in a better environment in that respect. Now, I think the 2030 Task Force is a key catalyst in identifying many of those areas and helping. But we've actually got to also use it as a way of driving some of the Whitehall end as well to make sure that debate takes place. Because I think, you know, to be fair to very much to airports like Glasgow and Edinburgh and the others in Scotland, they've all tried very hard to identify ways forward. And they all put a lot of resource and commitment to it. But actually, they need that thing from above that says, actually, it's not all your responsibility. The surveillance manufacturers, for example, are aware it's a UK policy that we've got to have aviation and wind coexisting. And so when you develop products, when you develop new ideas, that becomes part of that baseline environment. But you can't change that from the bottom up. That's got to come down from above as well. And I think that is the key building block to the future that I would like to see out of all the work streams we're engaging in.
Thanks, Andy. And I think that's hugely interesting and helpful, and perhaps something that might not have been as openly acknowledged unless it were for the work of the task force. And I think it's important that the task force operates as that kind of catalyst to have these conversations. So I don't know, Lesley, if you want to pick up just to help us wrap up on the discussion and picking up on what Andy's discussed and also what you see as the next steps for the task force.
Absolutely, yeah, I completely agree with what Andy Knill, what Andy Liddell and Ross have all said, that this, we have difficult issues here. We have two sectors that have difficult issues and that we must sort of tackle these in a sort of reasonable fashion. I completely agree. I mean, I'm head of policy, so obviously I'm going to say that I think policy is a key driver here, but I think that that establishing where we are now where we want to be and what we need to change and who we need to engage with on that journey is really important. And absolutely that will involve our colleagues at DFT and making sure we're sort of bringing them along on the journey, making them understand the issues that we face. So I think in terms of what's next, it is, well, COVID has really changed things, I think, for everybody right now. So our very much next steps are going to be this interim meeting that we're planning to have in mid-November. What has COVID done that has changed the way that we are looking at this? We established a really good list of actions in February. Are these still active? Are these exactly where we should be focusing as a group? Everybody has sort of constrained time at the moment. Where could we best focus our abilities here? Really acknowledging that there are difficulties in both sectors that COVID has led to. There's been a lot of staff on furlough. How do we make best use of this resource? And then really just reflect on the position and establish this sense of direction. So we are hoping to come out of this interim meeting in November with a sort of renewed sense of direction, a renewed commitment from both sectors, and a sort of a stepping stones on the way to what it is we need to achieve and by when.
And can you clarify that the workings of the task force, will they be made public, or will it be possible to access information about the work that the task force is doing?
Oh, of course, yes, absolutely. We've unfortunately been a little bit secretive accidentally up until now on this one. Our intention is to partner up with our friends at Scottish Renewables, who've kindly agreed to host certain things on their website for us. Scottish Government website is difficult to host things on. So yes, we absolutely do intend to publish both the minutes and sort of attendee lists, topics of discussions, papers on these websites. But I would suggest that anybody who is watching this right now has an interest in what this group is doing and wants to contribute to that discussion, please just get in touch with myself, with my Onshore Wind team, because we're really keen to sort of like keep that engagement and that discussion going.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for participating today, for putting a spotlight on what's going on, which will help, I'm sure, both aviation industry and developers alike. And just thank you all for your contributions, much appreciated.